Hi everybody, it is Seth, the Mild Mannered Mage, and welcome to another episode of War Council. In this program, we do a review of a deck and talk about how the deck functions, the different pieces and parts of the deck, talk you through mana base, your win cons, and all the good stuff to help improve your game. And I hope that you take some inspiration from these War Council videos to either build some cool decks or to make modifications to your decks that you already have in existence. Today I'm very excited to talk about one of my favorite decks to play, and this deck I actually drew inspiration from the professor over at Tolarian Community College because he did an idea video on this commander when he first debuted all the way back in Kaldheim. And I am talking about, of course, Vorinclex, the Monstrous Raider. And this is from, like I said, from Kaldheim, from where all the individual Praetors were popping up on the different planes. Vorinclex, the Monstrous Raider, is a Phyrexian Praetor. He's 2 green and 4 for a 6/6. He has the trample and he has the haste. So as soon as you cast him, he can come out swinging. And what he does is if you would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. And then if an opponent would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead, rounded down. So basically, this is pretty much a branching evolution on a stick. Not quite a doubling season because he doesn't do anything with tokens. But he does like to double counters. Well, I mean, it's kind of a combination of branching evolution and doubling season, less the token counterpart, because not only does he deal with the counters on your creatures, but he also deals with counters on planeswalkers, because those loyalty counters, when they come in, they're going to get doubled as well. So today we are going to be talking about my Vorinclex thick boys and super jerks. So after the break, we will be jumping right into this deck. All right, and I thought first of all we would just jump right in on the mana base for this Phyrexian deck because it's pretty simple. So here is my land base here, and these are all the fancy lands, and then everything else is just your basic forest. Now, I probably need to go through and put some pretty awesome forests here. I might have been lazy and just went and grabbed all the basics, and they don't really even match, which might drive some people crazy. So I probably need to do something on this to make these forests look good. But yeah, so just got a nice thick stack here of basic forests. And let's talk a little bit about the 4 fancy lands that we have here in this deck. First off, Reliquary Tower, giving yourself no maximum hand size. I know it only taps for a colorless mana, but I like that redundancy of the no max hand size. I typically try to run one of these in every one of my decks because you never know when you're going to get mana screwed, when somebody's going to cast some ridiculous will making you draw a bunch of cards, and I don't want to discard my cards. So I always try to put these in just in case. We also have a Memorial to Unity. It does come in tapped, but it will tap for a green mana source. And then you can also pay 2 and a green to sack it to look at the top 5 cards of your library and reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand and put the rest on the bottom of your library. If you're missing a creature card in your hand, this is a good way to get it. I know you're going to lose a land, but this deck, I've got some redundant mana production in here, so I don't really think that you'll feel losing this land. We also have a Moss Warp Bridge. It does come in tapped, but it has Hideaway, so you can look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 1 face down, and then put the rest on the bottom. You can tap it to add a green mana, and then you can pay a green to tap it to play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if you control creatures, or if creatures you control have a total power of 10 or greater. This deck is all about making some super thick boys. So you are going to have more than 10 power on the board, so you'll be able to cast that exile card in no time. And then finally, our last special land in here, Castle Garenbrig, enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest. I think we've got plenty of forests in this deck. You can tap it for a green, or you can pay 2 green and 2 to tap it to add 6 mana to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. So you pay 4 mana to get 6 to cast a creature spell. So that's a good way. You know, you can cheat Vorinclex out early because he is 6 mana. And then there's a wide range of 6 mana spells in here, or spells that can add up to 6 mana. So that is all of our land base for this deck. Now let's look at how we're going to go in and get those lands. All right, so we've got all these lands in our deck. How are we going to go through and get them? And I've got some of your classic land search here in this deck. The first one is a Cultivate, a green and 2. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand. So, you know, any deck that runs green, I think, runs a Cultivate in it. Puts 1 on the field, puts 1 into your hand. If you're missing your land drop, this gets you the land onto the battlefield as well. And it does come in because you're playing it from hand. Plus, it puts you up 1. So, like I said, super classic land ramp. On top of that super classic land ramp, we also have Kodama's Reach, which is another classic land ramp spell. Again, a green and 2. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, and put 1 into the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand. Then shuffle your library. Again, you know, that's going to fix you for mana. You know, you'll put 1 onto the battlefield tap, another into your hand. If you're missing that land drop, then you've got the land that you can play. So, again, these are all, I think, pretty much Commander staples. And the last one that I've got here for us is 3 visits, a green and 1. Search your library for a forest card, put that onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. Notice it does not come in tapped, so that gives you a land onto the battlefield, and you can use it immediately. And these are our only land searches in here. Now, you may think this is a little light in terms of our ramp, but I also have a lot of great mana producers in this deck, and we're going to check those out next. All right, so we've got our land base, we've got our mana ramp, our land search, but how else are we going to produce mana in this deck? Well, first we have the classic Soul Ring. Pay 1, artifact comes in, you can tap it to add 2 to your mana pool. Pretty much Commander staple. Just about every deck that I know of runs a Soul Ring in it. Some folks choose not to run it. That's up to them. Personally, I like it because it's a good mana acceleration. Next, we have a Gyre Sage. Now, Gyre Sage is an elf druid for a green and 1, and it's a 1/2, and it has Evolve. And what Evolve does is whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has a greater power or toughness, then put a 1/1 counter on this creature. So this deals with 1/1 counters. Vorinclex deals with 1/1 counters. If Vorinclex is on the field when Evolve triggers, instead of one 1/1 counter, you will get 2 1/1 counters, +1/+1 counters. And then Gyre Sage also reads, tap it to add a green to your mana pool for each 1/1 counter on it. So it has a 1/1 counter on it, a +1/+1 counter on it, it taps for 1. If it has 2 +1/+1 counters, it taps for 2, and so on and so forth. And again, if Vorinclex is on the field, she's just going to get bigger and bigger and tap for more and more mana. Next, we have a Cage Sun, which I feel like is great for your single color decks because it is a little expensive to run. It is 6 mana. As it enters the battlefield, you get to choose a color, in this case green. Creatures you control of the chosen color get +1/+1, and whenever a land's ability adds 1 or more mana of the chosen colors to your mana pool, add 1 additional mana of that color to your mana pool. So this makes your lands tap for 2 instead of 1. So it makes your creatures a little bit bigger, and then it also doubles your mana pool. So if you've got 6 lands when you played this, your next turn, you'll be tapping for 12 mana instead of 6, assuming you don't play a land drop that turn. So, this is a great way, and you'll see once we get to the thick boys, you'll see a lot of X spells. Well, and there's a lot of X spells throughout this deck. So this is a great way to accelerate those X costs. Next, we have a Nyx Lotus. I could talk today, I swear. From Theros Beyond Death. It's 4 colorless for a legendary artifact. Comes into the battlefield tapped, and then you can tap it to choose a color and add an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion. And when we're talking about devotion, we're looking at the pips on any card, any permanent card on the battlefield. So Vorinclex gives you 2 devotion. Gyre Sage would give you 1 devotion. So it looks at those colored mana symbols on your permanents, and for every permanent, or for every pip that you have, you get a mana. So if you had Vorinclex and Gyre Sage on the field, this would then tap for 3 mana. And then as you add additional permanents to your battlefield, it'll tap for more and more. So this is a fun little artifact. I think it's great in your monocolor commander decks. Then next we've got Incubation Druid. This is another elf druid for 1 and a green for a 0/2. And this one states you can tap in to add 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. If Incubation Druid has a 1/1 counter on it, add 3 of that type instead. So it can come in tapping for 1 mana, but if it gets a 1/1 counter on it, then it'll tap for 3 mana. And you can see down here at the bottom, it has a way that you can actually do that. You can pay 3 and 2 green to adapt 3. If it has no 1/1 counters on it, you put 3 on it. If Vorinclex is on the field, then that's 6. And that gets ridiculous. It still only taps for 3 mana, but then it goes from being a 0/2 to a 6/8. So, he can get a little chonky too if he needs to. Next, we have Savala, Heart of the Wilds. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. Now, this will work for a little bit in this deck. but you will get to a point where some of your creatures are just going to be so huge that you're not going to get the draw off of it. It also benefits your opponents as well. But really, I have it in here for this mana ability. Pay a green to tap it, add X mana in any combination of colors, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So if you've got a 100 power creature, which that is very possible in this deck, a couple weeks ago, I actually had a over 2,000 power creature. So I could have made 2,000 mana with this, and that would have just been ridiculous. But pay a green to tap it, add X mana of any combination of colors, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. At that point, you really don't even have to tap your lands. So fun little elf scout right here for 2 green and a colorless for a 2/3. Next, coming to us from Theros Beyond Death, we have our Nyxbloom Ancient, which is just a redonkulous card for 3 green and 4 colorless for an enchantment creature elemental 5/5 with the tramples. If you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. Oh boy. So your lands will tap for 3. If you got Caged Sun out, they're tapping for 2 times 3. Now they're producing 6 mana. You tap Savala, Heart of the Wilds for 100 mana. It's going to produce instead 300 mana. So it's going to get a little ridiculous with everything. But, again, this can be at times a mana hungry deck. So you're going to need ways to be able to produce the mana that you're going to need. And then lastly, this wouldn't be a Vorinclex deck without the OG himself. This is one of the reprint cards from March of the Machines, and that's Vorinclex, the Voice of Hunger. 2 green and 6 for Phyrexian Praetor, trample 7/6. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana of any type of that land produced. And whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step, which is a little much, but that it also gets gets you rolling with the extra mana production. And again, being on flavor with the extra version of this Praetor in this deck. And that's gonna be all of our mana production between the lands and the ramp and then some extra ways to produce mana. Now that we've got the mana, how are we going to make our boys big? And that's what we're going to be talking about in the next section. All right, so what are we going to do to make our creatures beefy, get counters on them, and just make them otherwise ridiculous? So first up, I have coming to us from the original Modern Horizons, and that is the Sword of Truth and Justice. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from white and blue. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on a creature you control, then proliferate. And what proliferate does is it lets you choose any number of permanents or players that have counters on them, and you give them each an additional counter. So again, once we start popping these, so this is going to have a counter trigger. I get to put a counter on something, and then I can proliferate and put an additional counter on it. And then if I've got Vorinclex out, that first counter becomes 2 counters, and then I proliferate, and that's going to be 2 more counters. So if I'm targeting 1 creature, Vorinclex is on the field, that goes from 1 counter to 2 counters to 4 counters. So this is a great little addition to this deck. Also saves you from any white exile effects or blue bounce effects, or targeted effects. So this is a great sword in this deck. Next, we have coming to us all the way from Baldur's Gate, the Ancient Bronze Dragon. Yes, Ancient Bronze Dragon. And this is an Elder Dragon for 2 green and 5 for a 7/7. It is a flyer. And when it deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. When you do, put X 1/1 counters on each of up to 2 target creatures where X is the result. I really like these ancient dragons from Baldur's Gate. I think they're a lot of fun. I see a lot of the copper dragon in red decks just for the treasures, because red needs mana help, because there is no good mana acceleration in red, in terms of trying to ramp out, get lands from your deck. So definitely running the copper dragon. But this is kind of a fun card to run in here, because you could put anywhere up to 20 counters on 2 creatures. With Vorinclex on the field, that gives you up to 40 counters. So you can make 2 creatures super chunky, super quick. And then even if you do nat 1 that roll, if Vorinclex is on the field, that's going to give you 2 counters. And then if you do have the Sword of Truth and Justice out and you're able to connect with it, then that gives you a proliferate trigger to make things even bigger. So this is a fun little card to have in this deck. Also coming to us from Theros Beyond Death is Renata Call of the Hunt, and this is the March of the Machines printing. I thought the art on it was pretty cool. I did have the other Constellation art in here, but wanted to kind of switch it up a little bit. So 2 green and 2 for a demigod legendary enchantment creature. Her power is equal to your devotion to green. Again, looking at the number of green pips in the permanents that you control. And then she also has a ability: each other creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional 1/1 counter on it. So there you go. We're putting counters on. If she's on the field and you cast another creature, it automatically gets a counter. If Vorinclex is on the field, it's going to notice it and start making them even bigger. So this is all about making those creatures extra beefy, because that's what this deck wants to do. Speaking about the beef, we've got, again, from Theros Beyond Death, Hydra's Growth. Enchant creature: when Hydra's Growth enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on an enchanted creature. There we go. Vorinclex sees it, makes it 2. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, double the number of 1/1 counters on enchanted creature. So it goes from 1. If Vorinclex sees it, it's got 2. Then on your upkeep, we're going to double it. So that goes to 4. Then it goes to 8. Then it goes to 16. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, until, your opponents are forced to deal with it. So this is a great way to make some super big, thick boys, which is it's fun. And this is an uncommon card from Theros Beyond Death, so it's a lot of fun. Next, coming from from Eldraine, we have the Great Henge. Now, I know you're probably thinking, now, wait a minute. This is a mana rock. And yes, it's a mana rock, and it's a fantastic mana rock. For 2 green and 7, and it costs X less, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You can tap it to add 2 green, and you gain 2 life. That's fantastic. But whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, it gets a 1/1 counter, and that's why it's in this stack. It's for that 1/1 counter, and again, if Vorinclex is out and it sees it, then that's going to double it, so it's going to get 2 instead. Plus, you get card draw off of it. I don't know what WotC was thinking when they printed this card, but this is fantastic, and it's also the same reason why it's still $60, because it is such a ridiculously good card. Oh my goodness. So fantastic card in this deck. Next is a new card that I just added into this deck, and that is Tribute to the World Tree. 3 green mana, 3 forests, For an enchantment, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card if its power is 3 or greater. Otherwise, put 2/1/1 counters on it. So this is a great way to, you've got some small creatures coming in. It gets 2 counters on it immediately. And then if it's a thick boy, you get a card. So, I mean, I just put this in when March of the Machines came out. I rotated some cards around and added this one. Drew it in my opening hand, the first game I played, and it did some freaking work. So, this is a fantastic card. I recommend it highly. I think, there's no downside. You make your creatures bigger or you draw cards. It's just great. Next we have, I think this is from Khans of Tarkir, I believe, and that is Hardened Scales. If one or more 1/1 counter would be placed on a creature you control, put that many and add another one. I mean, that is great. It makes an effect that gives you 1/1/1 counter, like the Hydra's Growth or the Great Hinge or Renata, into 2. And then Vorinclex sees it, and it's 4. And you've magically have added an additional 1/1 counter and just made that stuff that much bigger. And that's what this deck is going to want to do, is it makes some really big boys. Same with this, again, another new card that I just added right after March of the Machine came out, and that's Ozolith, the Shattered Spire. A 1 for a legendary artifact, and it's the same effect as Hardened Scales. I mean, if you look at the base effect, it's the same thing. With the exception of, it also looks at artifacts. If one or more 1/1 counters will be put on an artifact or creature you control, that many +1 are put on it instead. If a 1/1 counter will be put on a creature you control, put that many +1/1, plus an extra one. So they're almost the exact same effect, with the exception of this Ozolith looks at artifacts as well. Plus, for a 1 and tap it, put a 1/1 counter on target artifact creature you control as a sorcery. It sees that 1/1 counter and adds another one. And then if Vorinclex is there, it's going to add another double. So this is great. I mean, I was very excited when I saw this card got printed, and thought immediately, it's like, I gotta get it. This is a must right here. Plus, if you don't need it, you can cycle it for 2 to discard it and draw a card. All right, then next this was, I believe, a Jumpstart card, I think is where it originally came out, and that is Branching Evolution. If one or more 1/1 counters will be put on a creature you control, twice that many 1/1 counters are put on it instead. So if you have this out plus Vorinclex, if you put 1/1/1 counter, this sees it and makes it 2. Vorinclex would see it and make it 4. So 1 counter becomes 4 with Vorinclex and Branching Evolution. I mean, the math will start to give you a headache after a while, because we also have Primal Vigor in this deck. 4 for an enchantment. If one or more tokens would be created, twice that many. If one or more 1/1 counters would be put on a creature, twice that many. This is doubling season, but this is a world effect instead. So that is the downside to this card, is it's also going to benefit your opponents, but you're going to be going after these counters hard. You're going to out-counter them. Trust me on this. But we've got double. So again, if we have 1 counter, Vorinclex sees it and makes it 2. Branching Evolution sees it and makes it 4. Primal Vigor sees it and makes it 8. So 1 counter becomes 8. And that's not counting the Ozolith and the Hardened Scales triggers either. If you're able to get all of these out, and if you do, help your opponents, because they're going to need it. So again, the math will give you a headache, because we even have the doubling season in here. which is the same effect as a Primal Vigor, except it just focuses on you as well, not on everybody else. So in our one counter example, Vorinclex sees it, it becomes 2. Branching Evolution, 4. Primal Vigor, 8. Doubling Season, 16 counters off of one single triggered instance of a counter being created. So that is pretty ridiculous right there. I mean, there's reasons why these cards are so expensive, but you know, in a deck like this, it gets a lot of fun. It's pretty fun. A new addition that I've just added to this deck, and again, staying on flavor, we have the new Vorinclex from March of the Machine. Trample Reach, 2 green and 3 for a 6/6. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for 2 forests and reveal them and put them into your hand and shuffle. So that gives you 2 lands that you can then play. And then for 2 green and 6, exile it, return it to the battlefield, transform under its owner's control as a sorcery. And let's take a look and see what that is. And that is the Grand Evolution. When it comes in, you're going to trigger, and it's a saga, you're going to trigger in Chapter 1, mill 10 cards, put up to 2 creature cards from among the mill cards onto the battlefield. At the beginning of your next, or after your, after your draw step, you're going to move to Chapter 2 on your next turn. Distribute 7 1/1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. You know, think about those 7 counters and think about the counter doublers that you're going to have. I mean, if you just put them on, if you've got 7 creatures and you put 1 on each creature, even with Vorinclex on the field, that's just 2. It gets 2 counters. But then if you've got, you know, others on there, you know, if you've got the whole shebang, 1 counter becomes 16 counters. And it's just, you know, from there, it's going to be game over. Chapter 3, until end of your turn, creatures you control gain 1, pay 1. This creature fights target creature you don't control. Then you exile the Grand Evolution and return it to the battlefield back as Vorinclex, and then you can pay 8 to do it again. So, yeah, I think this is kind of a fun card to have in here. It gives you a way to, you know, get some creatures, you know, kind of, you know, go through your deck, through the mill process, get some creatures to hand, put some counters on creatures, you know, use the fight mechanic to clear the board, and then you still get to, it still pops around as a creature again, and you can do that again. Yeah, that's fantastic. I think, you know, it's a lot of fun in this deck. It's on flavor with the extra Vorinclex. But then what happens then when you've got all these counters on all these creatures, and then there's a kill spell and something dies? What then? You're losing all these counters. Not unless you have from Ikoria the Ozolith. 1 mana, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith instead. And then at the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all those counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. In that moving process, those creatures are going to get counters. If you have any of your counter doublers, then those counters are going to increase. So they're going to get bigger, and you can make them bigger. And it's going to be terrifying, and it's fantastic. And this is a lot of fun in this deck. So this is how we're going to make our boys thick. We're going to make them chonky, and we're going to, you know, start swinging and try to overrun our opponents. So let's take a look now at the big boys of this deck and how we're going to start overrunning our opponents. All right, now it's the moment I know many of you have been waiting for, and that is one of the main focuses on this deck. It is the big boys. So let's see what we've got in terms of some big boys for this deck. First up, we have Yorvo, the Lord of Garenbrig, coming to us from the Thrones of Eldraine. This is a giant noble, 3 green for a 0/0. When he comes in with 4/1/1 counters on him. I'll let y'all do the math with all the counter doublers. But if just Vorinclex is on the field, he's going to come in as an 8/8. And then whenever another green creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on Yoro, so he's just going to keep getting bigger. And then if that creature's power is greater than Yorvo, put another counter on him. So he's on the battlefield. Let's just say he comes in as a 4/4. You play a creature. He becomes a 5/5. Is that creature bigger than Yorvo? If the answer is yes, then he's going to get another one, and then he's a 6/6. And this is going to keep going on and on. And then especially with all the different the counter doublers, he's going to get real big and live up to his creature type being a giant. Next, I believe this is from Commander Legends, we have Slurk, the all-ingesting 5 and a green for a legendary ooze creature. He enters the battlefield with 5/1/1 counters on him. Yeah, if Vorinclex is on the field, that's going to be a 10. When Slurk or another creature you control dies, if it had a 1/1 counter on it, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control that has a 1/1 counter on it. So it has some targeted proliferation when other creatures die. I also mentioned we're going to have a lot of X spells in this deck, and that first one is going to be Vastwood Hydra. 2 green and X when Vastwood Hydra enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it. When it dies, you may distribute any number of 1/1 counters equal to the number of 1/1 counters on Vastwood Hydra among any number of creatures you control. So it was actually kind of funny. I was playing this deck the other day, and I had Vastwood Hydra in my hand, and I also had this Tribute to the World Tree. So I played Tribute to the World Tree first, and then I played Vastwood Hydra. And unfortunately, I only had 3 mana to my name at that time. So I played Vastwood Hydra for 3. So because its power was only going to be 1 because 2 green and X, and I can only X for 1, it got 2 1/1 counters on it. So it became a 3/3 instead. So again, like I said, Tribute to the World Tree doing some good work in this deck. And then with its death trigger being able to, when it dies, distribute any number of 1/1 counters. And then if you have any of your counter doublers, then it's going to increase everywhere else as well. Another really fun card in this deck, coming to us from Adventures in the Forgotten Realm, we have the Okra Jelly. A green and X for an ooze, and it's a 0/0 with trample, and it enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it. And it has split. When it dies, if it had 2 or more 1/1 counters on it, create a token that's a copy of it at the beginning of the next end step. The token enters the battlefield with half that number of 1/1 counters on it, rounded down. Now, the funny thing about this is, if you've got one of your token I keep saying token doublers, it's a counter doubler. If this is a 2/2, and you've got Vorinclex out, and it dies, and it splits, and it gets the 1/1 counters on it, because half of 2 is 1. But then Vorinclex sees it, and it becomes a 2/2 again. So it keeps getting the same size as it was, which I think is a kind of a neat interaction. And if you've got the other counter doublers on it, then those actual, the splits are going to be even bigger, because it's going to double even more. So it's really fun. I've gotten that interaction to pull off in this deck, and the look on my opponent's faces when that happens is just hilarious. Next, we have from Core Set 20, the Voracious Hydra, 2 green and X, trample 0/1. It enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it. So again, it being seen by Vorinclex, it's going to get bigger, and we're going to be attacked by our cat as she comes in and says hi. Say hi, Coraline. There she is. Yep. Say hi. Okay. I was wondering if that was going to happen. But anyway, so we've got, let me get my camera back where it was. I don't know. Yeah, that's right. You did that. It's okay. I don't care. All right. So anyway, we have our Voracious Hydra. It comes in with X11 counters on it, and when it enters the battlefield, choose one. Double the number of 1/1 counters on it, or it fights target creature you don't control. So it's going to double itself. Vorinclex is going to double it, and then if we have any of our other counter doublers, it's going to double again, and it's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Or even if you just want to choose to fight, and then the other counter doublers are going to make it even bigger too. So it's just kind of a fun interaction. Another good chonky boy that is going to get ridiculous in this deck is our Forgotten Ancient. Whenever a player casts a spell, you may put a 1/1 counter on Forgotten Ancient. And then with the counter doublers on the field, hang on, let me get my cat down because she's having lots of fun with the camera. All right, we're going to just put her in my lap and see if I can hold on to her while I do this. I'll leave this in here because, it's what happens, when you have pets. So when you cast a spell, and this is any player, so it's you or your opponents, when you cast the spell, then, you're going to make him bigger. If you've got your counter doublers on the field, they're going to make him bigger. And it's just, going to get ridiculous quick. You play this, and then if you make one circulation of the table, he's going to have 3 1/1 counters on it if your opponents have played other spells. And then if you got your doublers on there, it's going to get really bad. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may move any number of 1/1 counters from Forgotten Ancient to other creatures, so you can start making other creatures have 1/1 counters on it as well. We also have our Coraline Hydra. 2 green and 3 for trample 0/0. Enters the battlefield with 4 1/1 counters on it. And when it attacks, double the number of 1/1 counters on each creature you control. So he will go to 8, and it'll double all the counters on all your other creatures as well. So, that's going to make the rest of your board pretty ridiculous. Then we have, I think this is from Origins, the Mana Gorger Hydra. A green and 2 for a 1/1 trampler. And again, whenever a player casts a spell, put a 1/1 counter on Mana Gorger Hydra. This is Forgotten Ancient all over again, except he is a 1/1 instead of a 0/3. So by the time you've made one turn of the table, he will more than likely have 3 counters on him. Another way that we're going to make our creatures bigger is through the Staff of Tatiana. A quick creature gets +X/+X, where X is the number of force you control. Now, this isn't going to be, counters. We're just looking at making our thick boys thicker. And then whenever a quick creature attacks, create a 1/1 green force Dryad land creature token. So you're going to make a Groot that will tap for mana, because once it loses summoning sickness, because it's both a forest and a creature. But it's also going to, when you attack, it's going to make the creature go up by 1 more. So that's kind of fun. And this is from, I think this is from Brothers War, from the Commander decks in Brothers War. Yeah, because there's a little gear in there, so that's from Brothers War. Then also from Phyrexia All Will Be Well one, we have Zepandril the Hunger Dominus. 2 green and 5 for a legendary Phyrexian horror. Reach for 6. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. I've been playing this wrong, thinking it was just on my combat, but it is for every combat. So it just makes your board that much more harder to swing in on, because your stuff is just going to get that much bigger that faster. And then you can pay 2 Phyrexian green, which is either a green or 2 life, sacrifice 2 other creatures, put an indestructible counter on Zepandril, Hunger Dominus. And then lastly, making our thick boys even thicker, and is also a possible win con for you, we've got the Crater Hoof Behemoth. So we're going to hoof somebody. 3 green and 5 for a beast 5/5. Hasty boy. When Crater Hoof enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample. So now, you'll be able to overrun your opponents and gain X plus X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. So if you've got a nice board state, cast this and swing in for the win. So we've talked about our thick boys, and as I told you at the beginning, this is a thick boy super jerk deck. So let's take a look at those jerks, and I'm going to fix my camera from where my cat bumped it. So we'll be back in just a minute. And before we jump into this next section, I want to take a minute and thank y'all again for watching this video. And as I thank you, I do have an arena code here for the first folks that grab this. So here you go. Here is your code. And then we will be posting another one of these later. So why don't you grab it while you can. All right, so we've talked about our thick boys. Now let's bring some jerks to the party. First up, we have Vivian of the Arc Bow, 2 green and 4 from M19. She comes in with 5 loyalty. +2 to put 2 1/1 counters on up to 1 target creature. Again, if you've got your doublers in effect, that's going to affect both the number of loyalty counters. She'll come in with double if you've got Vorinclex or if you've got doubling season on the field. And then the +2 to add 2 1/1 counters. That's going to affect your creatures as you put those counters on. -3, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So you can use this for a targeted board wipe. A couple weeks ago, I was playing a match with this deck, and I think it was Archetype of Aggression was on the battlefield, which gave my opponent trample, and I couldn't get trample, so I couldn't get through his board. But using this fight mechanic on Vivian of the Arc Bow, I was able to deal with that creature and swing in for the win. And then -9, creatures you control get +4/+4 and gain trample until end of turn. So again, giving the creatures, the thick boys, that overrun capability of that keyword trample. Next, we have Vivian, Monsters Advocate from Ikoria, 2 green and 3. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you can cast creature spells from the top of your library. So that is a good aspect of this card. +1 to create a 3/3 green beast creature token, and then it can either have vigilance, reach, or trample. So it lets you get to populate your board state with these beast tokens. And then -2, when you cast your next creature spell this turn, search your library for a creature card with lesser converted mana cost and put it onto the battlefield. So this gives you a way to bolster your field. When you cast a creature, then you can go get something else to kind of come onto the field with it. So I think that is a great benefit. We also have Nissa, World Waker. 2 green and 3 for a 3 loyalty Nissa. +1, target land you control becomes a 4/4 elemental with trample, and it's still a land. +1, untap up to 4 target forests, so you can tap stuff to untap stuff. And then -7, search your library for any number of basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. They become 4/4 elemental creatures with trample. They're still lands. So this is a good way to, ramp your board really hard. You can untap forests so that you can cast more stuff. This is just a really great Nissa altogether. While we're talking about Nissa, let's talk about Nissa, who shakes the world. 2 green and 3 for a 5 loyalty Nissa. Whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green, so you're getting some extra mana out of the battlefield. Or not out of the battlefield, out of your lands. If I could talk today, that would help. +1, put 3/1/1 counters on up to 1 target non-creature land you control. Untap it. It becomes a 0/0 elemental creature token, or elemental creature with vigilance and haste that's still a land. And then -8, you get an emblem with lands you control, have indestructible. Search your library for any number of force cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So one of the funnier things that I was able to do was, with Vorinclex on the field, I was able to play Nissa, who shakes the world. And then instead of coming in with 5 loyalty, she came in with 10. So I immediately neg-aided her to go get basically all the forests in my library. So I had like 30 some forests on the battlefield. And then I had enough mana because of her doubling ability to play Garruk Primal Hunter. He is a 3 green and 2 Garruk Planeswalker. +1, create a 3/3 green beast creature token. -3, draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. And then -6, creates a 6/6 green worm creature token for each land you control. So I just went and got all my lands, or all my forests, out of my deck. Played Garruk because of the mana doubling ability. He comes in with 6. I immediately ultimated him and then made like 30 6/6 worms. And then the hug player in the deck, in the pod that I was playing, he was playing Kenrith, and gave them all haste. So I was able to just go ahead and swing in for the win. So it was kind of funny. We also have Vivian Reed from M19, comes in with 5 loyalty for 2 green and 3. +1, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature or land from among them, and put it into your hand. So again, filtering through your deck. -3, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying, so you can get some targeted removal in there. And then -8, to get an emblem with creatures you control, get +2/+2. Have vigilance, trample, and indestructible. So it's a good way to kind of protect all of your creatures once you have them. We also have in this deck Garruk, Caller of Beasts, 2 green and 4 for a 4 loyalty Garruk Planeswalker. +1, reveal the top 5 cards of your library. Put all creature cards revealed this way into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library. Again, trying to filter through your deck to get to the creature cards that you need. -3, put a green creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. So I'm just going to put this creature out here for free. And then -7, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a creature spell, you may search your library for a creature card and put it onto the battlefield. So you cast a creature and you get a creature. So 2 creatures for the price of 1. I also have in here Vivian Arcbow Ranger, 3 green and 1 for a Vivian with 4 loyalty counters. +1 to distribute 2 counters among 2 target creatures. They gain trample until end of turn. -3, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker. So some targeted removal through kind of a fightish mechanic. And then -5, choose a creature card you own from outside the game, reveal it, and put it into your hand. I don't use the -5 on this because I don't think it's fair. Because I'm not going to go get like the most fantastic creature that I have outside the game and put it in. It's not fair, don't like it, and I don't do it. So I just use this Vivian for the first 2 effects. Speaking of Vivian, we also have from the War of the Spark, Vivian, Champion of the Wilds, a green and 2. You may cast creature spells as though they had flash. +1 until your next turn, target creature gains vigilance and reach. And then you can -2 her to look at the top 3 cards, exile 1 face down, and put the rest on the bottom of your library. For as long as it remains exiled, you can look at that card and cast it if it's a creature card. So trying to, again, filter through and hopefully be able to hit that cast trigger. Then we have a new addition from March of the Machine, and that is Nissa Ascended Animus for 3, 2 green, and 2 Phyrexian green. So in theory, you could cast this for 5 mana and 4 life. She is a completed Nissa with 7 loyalty. +1, create a XX green Phyrexian Horde creature token, where X is Nissa's loyalty. -1, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Or really, I have this in here for the -7, which she can do immediately, which makes it even grosser. And then if you've got your counter doublers, she comes in with more counters and you can do it again until end of turn. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each force you control and gain trample. So this is a game ender right here, which is why I have it in here. So when you're ready to wrap up the game, just cast this and, it's go time for your creatures. And then speaking of game enders, we also have Eugene Ugin, the Spirit Dragon, an 8 mana Ugin Planeswalker. Comes in with 7 loyalty. If you got your counter doublers, that's going to come in with 14 or possibly more. Ugin, the Spirit Dragon, deals 3 damage to target creature or player for +2 loyalty. -X, exile each permanent with converted mana cost X or less. That's 1 or more colors. And then you really want to hit that -10. You gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, and put 7 permanents from your hand onto the battlefield. And then, so those are all of our Planeswalkers, and I've got a couple of extra Planeswalker-esque cards, our jerk cards, and the first one is from the new March of the Machine Commander decks. The first one is Vivian's Talent for 2 green and 1 to enchant Planeswalker. Enchanted Planeswalker has +1, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature or land card from among them and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom. Again, trying to filter through your library. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a loyalty counter on Enchanted Planeswalker. So I think this is a great way to, filter through, give your Planeswalkers some extra oomph if you've got something that, it's not really working for you and you need to kind of filter. So this gives you that filter effect. So I think that's pretty neat. I also recently added from New Capenna, Luxor Giada's Gift, legendary artifact equipment, 1 mana. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each counter on it. Equipped permanent isn't a Planeswalker and is a creature in addition to its other type, so it turns your Planeswalkers into creatures. That sounds familiar. Aftermath. So you can equip it to a Planeswalker for 1. Equip it to a creature for 3, and then equip creature, if it's a Planeswalker, you can still activate the loyalty ability so it can keep getting bigger and bigger. So that just gives you extra creatures that you can start swinging with. And then lastly, because this is a Super Jerk or Super Friends deck, we also have in here the Chain Veil, a 4 mana legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, if you didn't activate a loyalty ability of a Planeswalker this turn, you lose 2 life. And pay 4 and tap it. For each Planeswalker you control, you may activate one of its loyalty abilities once this turn, as though none of its loyalty abilities have activated this turn. So basically, it lets you use your Planeswalkers twice in a given turn. So I think that is pretty fantastic. All right, so we've talked about now all of our jerks in this deck. What are we going to do to protect our board state? And we are going to be talking about that next. All right, so once we have this fantastic board state, what are we going to do to try to protect it? So I've got a couple of things here that will help us protect our board state. The first is Croson Grip, which is a green and 2, has split second, so that means that it can't be countered. And that is destroy target artifact or enchantment. So if there's a propaganda on the field or something else that's just, maybe it's an exile enchantment that's messing up with your board state, this will help you get rid of it. We also have the classic Beast Within, a green and 2 to destroy a permanent. Its controller then creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. So, you get rid of a bad thing. You still give them a little bit of a benefit, but, it takes care of whatever is, messing with your board. Also have Heroic Intervention from M21, a green and 1. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So great way to protect from that board wipe, or if somebody's swinging in and you want to block everything, but its stuff is going to die. This is a great way to make your creatures indestructible. And then lastly, one of my favorite enchantments to try to sneak into creature heavy decks is Asceticism, and I'm probably saying this right. Asceticism, I don't know. I think this is from Scars of Meridian, 2 green and 3. Equip creatures you control can't be the targets of spells or abilities your opponents control. Or, in plain speak, your creatures have hexproof, so they can't be targeted. And then you can also pay 1 and a green to regenerate target creature. So if there is a board wipe, you can try to save your stuff. And that's how we're going to try to protect our board. Next up, we are going to be looking at how are we going to try to draw some cards and get what we need in order to win the game. So how are we going to try to filter through our deck and get what we need in order to win the game? So I've got a couple of different ways that we can try to get some stuff out, draw some cards, try to get what we need so that we can overrun all of our opponents. First up, we have Nylea Keen-Eyed. This is the new Nylea from Theros Beyond Death. Indestructible legendary enchantment creature god. As long as your devotion to green is less than 5, Nylea isn't a creature. So again, looking at those green pips. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less. And then you can pay a green and 2 to reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it into your hand. Otherwise, it goes into your graveyard. So again, trying to filter through your deck and find the things that you need. Find those creatures that you need. If you've got something in your graveyard that you want to get back onto the battlefield, we've got Eternal Witness for a human shaman. It is 2 green and 1. When Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So it's a great way to get some of those things back that you need in order to rebuild your board. One of the newer cards from Commander, I think this is Commander Legends, we have Kodama of the East Tree, 2 green and 4 for a 6/6 legendary creature spirit. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put onto the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card with equal or lesser converted mana cost from your hand onto the battlefield. So basically what this says is if you cast a permanent, not an instant, not a sorcery, but a permanent card. And even then, it's whenever another permanent enters, so that also counts lands. So whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put onto the battlefield with this ability, you can put it onto the battlefield if it has equal or lesser converted mana cost. So if you put a 3/3 onto the battlefield, you can put another 3/3. If you put a 3 CMC permanent, you can put another 3 CMC permanent. You can put a 2 CMC permanent, a 1 CMC permanent, or a 0 CMC permanent, which is a land. So this is just, again, helping you empty your hand out. So just making your board really stupid really quickly. We also have a Worldly Tutor, 1 green for an instant to search your library for a creature card and reveal it, and then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. So you can play this at your opponent's end step to put it on top of your library so that you can draw it at the beginning of your upkeep. Or draw it after your upkeep. I also really like this card. This is Shamanic Revelation, 2 green and 3 for a sorcery. Draw a card for each creature you control, so you're refilling your hand. And then Ferocious, you gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. You're going to have a lot of creatures that are power 4 or greater, so you're going to gain a lot of life off of this. So you'll be able to recoup anything that you may have lost. A new card from Phyrexia All Will Be One that I've put into this deck is Green Sun's Twilight. A green and X. Reveal the top X cards plus ones. So you actually get the full cost of this. So if you put 5 into this deck, or into this spell, you get 6 out of it. So you're actually paying 6. So you know, you're actually getting what you pay instead of losing 1. Choose a creature and or a land card from among them. Put those cards into your hand and put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. If X is 5 or more, instead put the chosen cards onto the battlefield or into your hand and the rest on the bottom. So yeah, if you put 5 or more into this, you get a land and a creature, and they go into the battlefield. Otherwise, they go into your hand, and I think that is pretty great. And then lastly, we've got the classic Beast Whisperer, Elf Druid. Whenever you cast a creature, draw a card. So, you know, cast those creatures, refill your hand for the cards that you're missing. So now that we've got our creatures, we've drawn our cards, we've got our mana, we've got our battlefield, how are we going to close this thing out? And we're going to be talking about that in the last and final block. And we're ready to close this game out. So how are we going to do that? Now, this is primarily, you know, like I said, it's thick boys and super jerks. The super jerks are going to help you, you know, give yourself such a board state that, you know, your opponents aren't going to be able to deal with the big creatures that you've got going on. So then what do we do? What else can we do to kind of help assist with those big creatures? Now, we did already talk about one of the big win cons, you know, Crater Hoof Behemoth, but I think that's kind of overdone. So let's take a look and see what else we've got in order to, you know, help our creatures win us the game. The first one is, again, another Kodama. This is from the Neon Genesis, Kamigawa Neon Genesis, I think it is. And that is Kodama of the West Tree. This is a green and 2 for a 3/3 reach creature. Modified creatures you control have trample. So modified includes equipment, attachments, auras, or counters. So all these counters that we're going to put on our creatures are going to make our creatures modified, and they're going to have trample now. Now, this also has the added bonus of whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then you get a shuffle. But, you know, this is in here for primarily that modified creatures get trample. Next, we have from the new March of the Machines, Surok and Goreclaw. This is a human and bear, 2 green and 4 for a 6/5. Trample. Other creatures you control have trample. That's what this is in here for the trample, and for when another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on it, and it gets the hastises. So this is a dually effective card in this deck. By it gives your creatures trample, plus it gives them a 1/1 counter when they come in. So that is doubly effective with Vorinclex. Next, we also have the original Nylea, God of the Hunt, a green and 3 for a legendary enchantment creature god, indestructible. As long as your devotion is less than 5, Nylea isn't a creature. Other creatures you control have trample. I mean, this is about overrunning your opponents with thick boys. This is the beefy boys. We're going to make some big creatures. We're going to have them be tramply, and we're going to overrun our opponents. And this is another good way to do that. When I was kind of digging through my cards trying to find, how we're going to make this work, I also ran across Primal Rage for a green and 1. I think this is from Stronghold. I think that is that symbol, and this is this is a common card. All creatures you control gain trample. Just straightforward for a 2-mana enchantment, and that is going to do the job. And then lastly, the last enabler that we have, and I'm going to try to remember everything that this does. This is Akroma's Memorial. I believe it is creatures you control gain flying, haste, trample, vigilance, pro-red, pro-black. I think that's everything. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but flying hydras and their tramply hydras, that's going to do the job. So that's it. That's the deck. Let me know what you think in the comments. I hope that you've enjoyed this War Council. Let me know if you've played a deck like this before, or let me know about your Vorinclex decks. Be sure to give us a like and a follow and a subscribe, and we're going to continue to try to make some great videos for y'all. Also, as promised, we have this wonderful arena code for you, so we will leave this right here for you. Again, I want to thank everybody that has helped watch these videos and given feedback. I hope that you enjoy the programming that we've got going on so far. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Mild Mannered Mage, and then you can also follow me on Twitter, which is Mild Mannered Mage, where I post some different fun things. I've posted about my pops that I've been getting, other Magic stuff, tournaments and games that I've been playing. So I hope that y'all will follow me on all the social media outlets. In the meantime, this has been an episode of the War Council. And again, I am Seth, your Mild Mannered Mage, and we will see you on the next video. Have a great one, everybody.